Okay, so the Ohio Nutrition Incentive Network is a partnership for retailers, producers, and communities to increase access to locally grown, healthy food for all Ohioans. You can see some of the members of the network listed on the slide, and I see some of them in our audience today. Next slide, please. So the Nutrition Incentive Network does many things and largely coalesced around the idea of offering incentives to purchase fresh foods at farmers markets and local retailers. This is a triple bottom line program that helps people who have low food access, supports farmers, and increases health. So in 2019, Produce Perks, which is that incentive, nutrition incentive, SNAP incentive, excuse me, served 16,126 shoppers in 97 locations. That was the equivalent of $912,000 of healthy food sales spent directly with 500 plus Ohio farmers. Produce Perks is currently offered throughout the state at a number of farmers markets and local retailers. That number is increasing as farmers markets are beginning to reopen for the outdoor season. And Produce Perks is offering an unlimited SNAP match through June 30th of 2020 to address our current food system issues. Next screen, please. There are 100 plus access points in 31 counties throughout Ohio. You can see the expansion there from the kind of tealy green color to a darker color. And we find that SNAP users come from all over the state and actually in the surrounding region as well to access this produce incentive at those locations. So next slide, please. So today we wanted to gather folks together to talk about best practices for safely operating SNAP and farmers markets, both during in-person and the drive-through style or pre-order and pickup farmers market models. We have market managers joining us to talk about what they've done, what's worked, and what's been challenges, as well as the Ohio Farmers Market Network and Produce Perks, who are gathering input from people across the state. We'll discuss management of tokens and incentive alternatives at farmers markets and share some tools and resources that are available to operators, like many of you on the call today. Next slide. So I introduced myself. I also want to let you know that Anna Bird is on the call from Produce Perks and Aaron Molnar from Countryside Conservancy. We also have Jamie from Ohio Farmers Market Network, Andrew from Haymakers Farmers Market, and I just lost the last name. Yeah, Anna.
Amanda from Findlay Market as well.
Yes, thank you. So there's enough of us in the call now that we don't have time for personal introductions of everybody who's here, but it would help us if you would type in the chat box your name and pronouns, the organization you're representing, and your primary interest, whether that's in-person reopening, pre-order drive-through, a hybrid model, or something general. Later in the day, we are going to go into breakout rooms, and if there are enough cohesive groups, we'll try to group you around those interests. So thank you. I see folks typing in the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, I want to let you know that I and Anna and some other staff from Produce Perks will be monitoring the chat box for questions. We welcome your questions at any time through the chat box, and we've spaced out several Q&A sessions where we will address those questions. And then, like I said, at one point, we will break out into breakout rooms where you can go further in discussion with some other peers. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to talk about some of the general and farmers markets as they are working right now.
All right. Hi, everyone. So again, my name is Anna Bird. I'm the Director of Programs with Produce Perks Midwest. And so, we put together this presentation based on a lot of feedback that we've been getting from farmers markets around, questions of how they're going to open this summer. And so this is really to share experiences from those, market managers that have had experience thus far with opening their farmers markets in April and now into May. But first, I'm going to kind of go through some best practices that we've identified for continuing a physical market. So what I mean by that is that perhaps your market, the best fit this summer is really to open as usual with modified layouts, of course, but a drive-through isn't the best fit for your space perhaps, or your staff. A curbside pickup isn't the best fit. So these are all going to be resources and tips and just thoughts about how you might do that this summer, and keep your customers and vendors and staff safe. So I'm just breaking it into a few different areas. So one, just to very briefly touch on how you may redesign your market space and what resources are available for helping guide you through that process. And then we'll talk a little bit about some safe token handling. There's been fewer resources on that, I think, at a national, level. And so we've kind of done some digging and come up with some of the top tips that we've seen. And then just a few thoughts for going tokenless if you really feel like at your physical market space, you are not going to be able to handle tokens. Our goal at Produce Perks is, of course, to keep SNAP and Produce Perks available for customers at farmers markets this summer. And so if you really feel like you can't use tokens at your market, then we can help think through some different options. So the first topic is just redesigning your market space. And there are so many resources out there, both locally here in Ohio and also at the national level, that are really great for helping you think through this. So we're not really going to spend time on that because there's been a lot of calls and a lot of webinars already. Two that really stand out as top-notch guidelines are one, right here from Ohio, our Ohio Farmers Market Network COVID-19 in your Farmers Market Guide, which just gives a list of really important things to think about when you are restructuring your market to allow for social distancing. The Ohio Department of Agriculture has said that these are sound recommendations, and so we encourage you to use those as well. The second one is the Farmers Market Coalition Farmers Market Physical Redesign webinar that happened a few weeks ago now. There's a recording of it, and it's another really great resource for you. So then in this topic of safe token handling, there's three resources that I want to point you towards before we get into some tips. So one, the Michigan Farmers Market Association, a great wealth of of information in general, has produced a guide of how to clean tokens. So it talks a little bit about some ideas for cleaning wooden tokens versus metal tokens and some best practices. So I would encourage you to look at that and establish those guidelines in your market this summer if you're using tokens. Another one is a sanitization guide for terminals, because terminals could be damaged by some heavy-duty cleaning materials. So you'll want to take a look at that if you will be having customers at any point touch your card terminal. And then this last one comes from the World Health Organization on just putting on and removing personal protection equipment. So could be a really great resource for your staff or vendors in thinking through how to get ready and end the market day. All right, so these next few slides are just going to talk about some tips that you will want to think about and how you might want to think about putting together a plan for handling tokens at your market. So I've broken it into three sections. One, some thoughts for preparing for market, so pre-market, during market, and then after market. So as we've been looking through the resources that are available, a couple of tips for pre-market that came to light are thinking through the placement of your SNAP booth. So You'll want to make sure that your SNAP booth is perhaps closer to the entrance of the market, or you can control the flow of customers passing through the market. So the first stop is for them to get their tokens, they can shop and then exit at another location. Just be really conscious about allowing for correct social distancing practices if a line should form, and think about how you may control a line in that situation. Another one that we've seen that's a great tip is pre-counting and pre-bagging your tokens. You can't require that a SNAP customer purchase, say, only $10 worth of tokens or a minimum of $10, etc. But you could think about, look at your average transactions and come up with some numbers for pre-packaged tokens that could allow you to more effectively and efficiently distribute tokens quickly to customers, and also to reduce touching your staff touching them before they get into the customer's hands. So that's a great practice that you can do pre-market. During the market, a few tips that have come from some of our managers here locally and also from some national resources are thinking about how you can avoid touching that customer's card, that SNAP BBT card. So you may be able to set up your terminal so that the customer can swipe without touching the terminal. You may be able to have the customer lay their card on the table or show it to you, and you hand type the number in so that the card doesn't even need to be swiped, depending on what kind of machine you have. I've also seen some tips on using a disposable item, which breaks my heart, and so many of yours, I'm sure, in the farmers market world, but these times call for such things, to type in the EBT number, so maybe a coffee stir if you have a traditional keypad, or a cotton swab that can be disposed to reduce, again, that contact with the machine. And then, of course, you'll want to make sure that all your staff is trained on disinfecting between each customer visit. Also, you can encourage and advise vendors to use a vessel to accept tokens from customers, like a basket, to avoid touching them as much as possible. And of course, it seems obvious, but we thought we ought to put it on there. Don't reuse tokens in a single market day. Make sure that you have a separate bucket for those tokens to use or to keep them separate from disinfected tokens. After the market, some things to think about if you are having customers or your vendors turn in their tokens at the end of the market day, to have some kind of surface that you can clean off, to have them perhaps place to count, and then push off the table into your used token bucket that you can disinfect regularly, or just have your vendors pre-bag them into, say, groups of 10 or 20 or whatnot, and submit them that way. Again, make sure that you keep disinfected tokens separate from these tokens, and then follow those guidelines for disinfecting your tokens. The metal produce works tokens could be used in a mild, cleaned with a mild bleach solution, or soaked in soapy water. I would advise also not touching them for a while if possible. So just make sure that you're using those sound practices that we've posted already. So at this point, I'm gonna hand it over to Andrew Rome with the Haymaker Farmers Market, and they have been operating a drive-through market where they are also using tokens still. And so we'd like to hear a little bit about his experience. Andrew, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes. Yes, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hold on.
Excellent. Well, I can explain about our drive-through market and how it's been working, and then the changes to our token process, how we're sanitizing tokens, and the things that we've learned along the way. So we've just done 7 weeks of our drive-through market, and we'll continue for 4 more weeks. And after that point in June, then maybe we'll be able to go back to our regular walk-up market, but we're not sure on those procedures yet. So far, we finished up the end of our indoor season with 13, 14 vendors participating in those 6 weeks of drive-through. And then last week, we started our May outdoor season with, we had 24 vendors last week. So when we expanded the number of vendors that we had more customers, more cars coming through, and then we had to work more on the efficiency process, and we had a cashier rather than me handling everything with a higher volume. So depending on the number of cars that you have coming through a drive-through, that really affected how we ran the market. But in terms of the token snap transaction process, it remained basically the same. We're still accepting cards, credit cards, or the EBT cards at the market. And the biggest change that we found was that we need to be much more aggressive in selling tokens. Normally we wait for people to approach us, but at the drive-through line, we have a single line of cars going through a single line of vendors at the market. And so we're approaching every single car and asking them if they want any tokens. And so we found out that most of our customers didn't know that there were tokens available at the market. And it was a great opportunity to explain how that worked. But by approaching each car, I'm also the first person that they would see at the market. So they've been waiting at our peak times up to 40 minutes in line in their car before they get to the first vendor, before they get to me. So I need to really set the tone for, you're not in line at fast food drive-through. You know, I'm welcoming to the market through my mask. They have their window rolled up, so I'm, you know, being very outgoing and as excited and enthusiastic about the market as I can, because that's going to help them be positive with all the vendors and set that tone. So I'm doing that while leaving my tent where I'm selling tokens to approach their cars, because I'm a slow point in the line. So, you know, going back in the line and having multiple cars back be where I'm selling the tokens to them, and then running things back and forth, which can be a real hassle as you're getting them to enter their PIN or sign a piece of paper. When we switched to a cashier last week, we found that we actually needed 2 people to have the cashier approach cars in line at the market. So that was the biggest change to that actual transaction. But we've still been having people press their PIN buttons in themselves, and then after each transaction, I would wipe down the credit card machine. I'm using gloves, I'm using hand sanitizer, and having the gloves, in addition to hand washing station and hand sanitizer, I think is an important part of customer relations here. I would see on social media that customers would post, oh, you can go to the Haymaker Farmers Market, they're using masks, they're using gloves. So that is not just a safety thing, but it is public relations. People want to see some visible sign that you're taking all the necessary precautions. So customers hand me their card, I swipe it myself, or our cashier is swiping it now, and they're entering their PIN, and we're handing out the tokens. So the tokens that we have at the market, I am sanitizing them between each market, because, oh, I'm sorry about that. We're sanitizing the tokens between each market, and I mention this to each customer because they need to have confidence that what we're doing is safe. And the only way I could come up with to sanitize our tokens is I'm baking them. I'm baking them in my oven at 250 degrees for about 30 minutes or so. So they're sterile. I don't think there's any way that the tokens could transmit the coronavirus, but they're not clean. They're no cleaner than cash. So, you know, I wouldn't lick a token. It's not clean, but it's sterile. And I reviewed this method with the Kansas City Health Department. And in addition to heat treating the tokens, then I age the tokens for several days before I process them after the market. So we have a Saturday market, and then on Friday, that's when I count them up and heat treat everything. So the protocols for vendors redeeming tokens with me, some of them redeem them at the end of each market, some of them save them up for weeks at a time. Whenever vendors want to turn in tokens, that's fine with me. And then we have safety recommendations for our vendors that are doing the customer transactions, but that's separate from my interaction with tokens. And so the other biggest lesson that I wanted to mention is our token use has gone way up. We ask our customers to stop using credit or debit cards at each vendor in the drive-thru because it holds up the line. So then we're selling far more of the credit debit tokens. And then with the Produce Perk Unlimited Match, we have more SNAP sales as well. And we have new customers who have never come to the market before or who have never used SNAP or are new SNAP recipients. So we're selling far more tokens at the market each week. And so we have to be prepared for that increase in numbers. Those are the main points that I wanted to mention. Anna, is there anything else you want me to cover?
I think that's great. I've noticed some questions come in the chat, so maybe at the end of this session we'll have some time for Q&A. But yeah, that's great. Guys, don't lick your tokens. And I think one piece that really stood out was just that importance of the customer communication of the market being a safe space and communicating all the protocols that you've put in place. That's a really good tip. All right, we'll hand it over to Amanda Lucas with the Findlay Farmers Market, and they've also opened it. They have opened a traditional market, open air market, and are using tokens. So we'll hear a little bit about her experience as well.
Okay, hi everyone. So a Findlay Market is a bit of a hybrid in and of itself because we are a city-owned but nonprofit run public market that actually owns majority of the space that we operate on. So we have both an indoor market with full-time vendors, and then we have a farmers market component where our food vendors, specifically farmers, are able to operate. So we are in a unique situation where we are not renting out our space or using space that is otherwise operated by another entity, which is great in terms of a farmer's market. So that means that we had some autonomy, of course, to pivot and adapt based on the regulations that have come out with COVID-19 and the necessary precautions. So for us, one of the biggest lessons was knowing who our biggest advocates were. So definitely communicating with community partners like Produce Perks. You know, you can kind of see a picture on the screen of a post that Produce Perks put up for us, mentioning that our hours have expanded to include not only Saturday and Sundays, but also Fridays. And for those SNAP and Produce Perks shoppers. And then we reposted. And then another big advocate of ours were farmers. It was really important to communicate with our farmers. We've been learning that lesson time and time again of making sure that the farmers are in the loop, that they know that they feel like they have a say. Even though there are rules and regulations we have to follow to remain open, there is a little bit of autonomy. So because we have the infrastructure, a drive-through market was not necessarily, for our farmers, were not the best fit. So we had to figure out a way to operate the market, the farmers market, in a way that best supports the farmers. So that's why we've stuck to more of a traditional farmers market, of course, with social distancing in mind, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So the next slide is kind of talking about, so yeah, next slide, Anna. So our produce perks token system somewhat remains the same, but with a higher emphasis on sanitation. So we have an education associate at Findlay Market who is now stationed at the Market Center, which actually allows for more social distancing because our ed center was too close to the farmers market, and it could cause crowding in the parking lot, which would make it difficult to do social distancing. However, one of the things that we do, since we have an education associate, she's the one who's really touching and operating the coins. She's wearing a mask and wearing gloves. She switches her gloves out every time she gets used coins, and then also washes her hands after every transaction. So she's being very cautious and very safe. And because it's really one point of contact, we're able to really monitor that a lot. So you can kind of see our not very sophisticated system. We have a used container that at the end of the weekend, we take and clean with first we sanitize and then we wash with actually the other way around. We wash with dish soap and then sanitize, and then we keep our clean tokens separate. So that way that makes it reassuring to customers as well that they know that they're getting clean and sanitized tokens. So the tips that we used was from that Michigan Farmers Market Association. So finally, just to kind of do a quick overview of our social distancing, typically we can hold about 24 farmers in our farmers market shed. However, as we need to do social distancing, we actually are limiting the amount of farmers to 12 at this current time. And basically every other stall is empty, along with it being catty corner. So you can see that there might be a vendor across the aisle, and across from them will be an empty stall. So a line can form of customers that are 6 feet apart, and each vendor will get a sign of like, this is the line that the farmer, this is the line for this particular farmer. And with the input from our farmers at Findlay Market, this was kind of the best solution, while also supporting kind of business somewhat as usual, with an emphasis on social distancing and sanitation. So that's kind of what we've learned. Is the biggest point is that communication and feedback and messaging, and making sure that we're being clear that it's for both so the market can remain open and safe for our shoppers, while also not putting the burden on our shoppers and vendors as little as possible. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Amanda.
All right. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a couple of thoughts to throw out before we move into a Q&A portion. If you really feel that you can't handle tokens at your market, you have a couple of options. The best is probably to look at a pre-order software or system, and we'll hear about that in just a moment. But I did hear, in doing some research, hear about some markets in other parts of the country that are doing a couple of other things, opening that physical market and not using tokens. So putting these out there, I'm not sure that these are, these I think are pretty staff, needing a lot of staff capacity or volunteer capacity, but they could be options. So just throwing them out there. One is that you have an order form that's available at the booth, and you have a runner to get those items from vendors and put an order together to avoid tokens and just do one transaction and apply a Produce Perks discount at the booth. And then the second is that SNAP customer, you could provide an order form that each vendor has that SNAP customers could have the vendor fill out, bring back to the booth, and again, do one transaction on the card and apply a Produce Perks discount. I don't know if that really cuts down all that much on the opportunities for touching things between customers and vendors, but I have seen that some markets have done them. So wanted to throw it out there. And just a couple of things to note: if you are going tokenless, do think about a system to have in place to make sure that you can accept any distributed tokens that either you have distributed through your SNAP token system or else through the Produce Perks system. The USDA would require that you have the ability for customers to either use those tokens at the market or that you would provide a reimbursement on their card. So just things to keep in mind if you are going tokenless. There are tokens out in the world and customers should have that opportunity to utilize them somewhere, somehow. Okay, Rachel, I'll pass it back to you.
All right, so we had a few questions come in. One I just answered that, yes, this is being recorded. So if you miss anything or because we're moving kind of quickly and you want to review it, that will be available. Anna, I assume we'll send that out within the week.
Yep.
Sure. All right, so a couple of questions that came in. Amanda answered how often gloves were changed in their system. Andrew, would you jump in and say how often you change your gloves when you are issuing tokens?
Sure. We talked to the Kent Health Department about using gloves at the market, and they really don't recommend gloves because they say gloves are only as effective as often as you change them. So a better option is to wash your hands or to sanitize them frequently. But customers love seeing gloves, so we wear them. But we try to change them not between every transaction, but frequently. So, you know, more than every half an hour. And then as I'm like getting a wipe with bleach water, or we have a sanitizing spray to spray down the machine, then I'm wiping down the gloves as well, you know. And so that's how we handle it at the market.
Thank you. So another person asked right at the beginning about best practices for sanitizing both metal and wood tokens. And I think we've answered that. Anna mentioned you can use a bleach solution for the metal Produce Perks tokens. Andrew mentioned the option of baking wooden tokens. And then the MIFMA guide has some other options, and consulting with your local health department, I think is another good thing to mention. Let's see, there was a question. So it sounds like, Andrew, that you issue tokens. Then do you have a cashier at the end to check people out and collect the tokens that are offered at the beginning?
No, we sell tokens to customers who swipe their cards, and then they use those tokens to buy products from the vendors. The vendors turn in their tokens to me, and then I redeem them. I take the tokens home, count them, and the vendors turn in their token to me either at the end of the market or as often as they like, but we're not cashing people out at the market.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, Amy, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask a follow-up if you have one. All right. There'll be more time for more questions later. Can't unmute myself, Amy says. Let's see if I can find you. All right, you should, oh, wrong Amy, maybe. No more questions, move on, thank you. All right, so there was one more that popped up about food safety protocols for vendors. Do any of the market managers on the call, could you speak to that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I think in general, the food safety measures for any, especially whether it's prepared food, packaged food, I think that was I think most markets would say that the initial rules and regulations that surround those vendors are still very prevalent. But also in this environment of COVID-19. I think being aware that especially prepared food vendors can bring a crowd. So at Findlay Market, the Findlay Outdoor Market, we are very much limiting how much prepared food vendors we have available. So no, and we also have no sitting anywhere because we don't want to give the impression of vendors, of shoppers being able to linger and stay. That's kind of the habit of our shoppers, which is great, but not in an environment where we're trying to encourage social distancing. Another thing is, though in the past we've highly encouraged vendors to sample, and all of our vendors do, all of our food vendors do a great job of being cautious and aware and safe. Moving forward, at least for the foreseeable future, we're highly encouraging vendors not to do that, just because it's somewhat about the customer perspective. Customers may not feel safe. They may have questions of like, is it a good idea? So some of those decisions have to be based on comfort of the customers, even though sampling can be really beneficial in more of a calm environment.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on, and we'll have another question and answer break after Erin presents. So I see another question in the chat box, and that's fine. We'll keep going on these and get all your questions answered by the end. But I want to give Erin the chance to present. So we'll switch screen sharing over to Erin now.
All right. Can you guys see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
Yes.
perfect. Okay. We are a little behind on the agenda, so I'm going to go through this as fast as possible because I think that the questions are the most important part. So Countryside's farmers markets transition from, an indoor winter market to a pre-order pickup model towards the end of March. We're using a platform that allows all vendors participating to sell on the same site. We did this because we wanted to have as minimal contact as possible. We also felt we could serve more vendors this way and that it would potentially be more financially viable than a modified physical market in March in Ohio. Another reason was that we went with this centralized pre-order prepay was because it did allow us to accept SNAP and offer produce perks. Well, let me go forward. Sorry, technical difficulties. Here we go. This is what the website looks like. It's just like any other e-commerce site. Items are listed. It lists the vendor selling them. The platform we're using allows us to have two separate sites, basically. So normal shopping, at the end of the transaction, you check out with a credit card. So we have a separate catalog for SNAP customers that does not prompt for a credit card payment. That requires special access. So when a customer wants to utilize that catalog, they pre-fill out a Microsoft form, which provides us all of the information that we need for both the transaction, for the FM tracks recording, and to provide the information for their customer account. This is just a brief overview of our pickup location. So flow of customers in, we have 3 stations. The transactions physically occur at the market on Saturday at pickup because of the restrictions around prepaying for products with SNAP, and that happens at this 3rd station here. So like I mentioned, there's a separate catalog that contains only SNAP items and does not prompt for a credit card payment. It requires access. This only needs to happen once. Once the customer has been added to the customer database and given access to that, they can go in and shop when the store opens, just like anybody else. The accounting side of it is the more cumbersome part. The ordering is cumbersome for the customer for sure. The accounting is cumbersome on the back end for the market, but it's not impossible. I do that via spreadsheet. So this is kind of the master spreadsheet that we use to prepare orders every week that come in through the website. The 4 primary components that go into the SNAP piece of it is a tab that lists our vendors and then identifies them as selling SNAP eligible product only. If they sell Produce Perks eligible product only, they get a PP. If it's manual, then that means they either sell some combination of SNAP only, Produce Perks, or not eligible product. When the orders come in, they go into, not that spreadsheet, this spreadsheet. And at the end, there is a column here that pulls information from that first tab to this column L based on the vendor, and then it populates whether they're SNAP or Produce Perks. If it's manual, then I go through and review, is that product, one of our honey vendors sells laundry soap as well. So if it's honey, I add the SNAP. If it's laundry soap, either delete it or add NA. This tab calculates their transaction. On it, I have their FM Tracks ID, their zip code. So this makes entry into FM Tracks after the transaction very easy. This is a formula that calculates all of their items, so their total invoice amount. The next 2 columns separate that out by SNAP and Produce Perks. Column J is what's called a helper column. It basically helps with the conditional formatting. So any transactions that are highlighted in yellow, they actually bought more produce than they bought SNAP, only SNAP eligible. That was something that at the beginning of this was tricky for me. I couldn't really figure out what that math was. So it's gotten much easier since I figured that out. And then it will distribute that. So for this customer this week, she bought, not that customer, sorry, let's go with this customer. This customer bought $41.98 in SNAP eligible, $44 in produce. So it does the math. It's basically a 50% split. But this determines when to do that math. Because we were transitioning from a token system and there is an unlimited match, I also wanted to be able to offer our SNAP customers that same benefit because they didn't make the decision to do a drive-through market with no tokens. We made that decision. So I am also tracking how much of their Produce Perks they're earning and spending. One of the cumbersome pieces of this is that it cannot account for everybody's budgeting and spending preferences. So I do have 2 customers who basically want to save their Produce Perks for the main produce season. So, this customer actually spent $171.50 this week. They don't want to use $40 of which was Produce Perks eligible. They don't want to use any of those Produce Perks. So they're just accumulating those tokens. That accumulation is available in future transactions as curbside continues. If we transition to outside and they have a balance, we'll just give them a heavy bag of tokens to spend. So this is the kind of working portion. This section, let's hide all of this, is kind of the portion that allows me to do the data entry. So we've just got FM Tracks, zip code, transaction, and then it gets 100% matched. The final component of this is specific to SNAP customers. I put their orders in here. I have the list of vendors here. And again, formulas populate these themselves to determine what dollars were spent on which item. So was it SNAP or was it Produce Perks? And then I can enter my vendor reimbursements straight from this, and it's pretty efficient. I do continue to learn new things every week in this process. This week I had a customer who requested to pay part of their transaction with a credit card. That is feasible. I just had to work out the system. So it's getting more efficient and learning as we continue to learn, and will continue to evolve as the situation and our response to it continues to evolve. On site at the market, we use Novadia to process. So it's on an iPad with a swiper. For 3 weeks, I took the card from the customer and swiped it, with all the gloves and the sanitizing. The 4th week, the swiper wasn't working right. I took their card and I typed it in, and as I handed it back to a customer, I realized I don't need to touch their card. So now they just show it to me through the window. I felt like a dummy when I realized that, and the actual market manager for Countryside didn't say that I was a dummy, but she was like, oh, I thought that's what you were doing, huh? So again, like, everything we're doing in these arenas is outside of the norm and an ongoing learning process. What Countryside is doing with Local Line is not 100% adaptable to other pre-order systems, but it is absolutely adaptable. If spreadsheets aren't your thing, I am more than happy to help you in whatever system you are using, find the efficiencies that can benefit you, the farmers and vendors, and your customers. Let me just see if I had more slides. I give the customer the option to verbally tell me their PIN or to put it in themselves. Because our SNAP customers are so regular, most of them are comfortable telling me their PIN, but it allows only one touch point that needs to be sanitized, even if they do opt to touch the screen. One last question that I have on here: when you're considering how you can adapt this for your system, how and when are you reimbursing the vendors? Because all the sales are going through Local Line, Countryside is providing payment to vendors on the pickup days, and within that, it's already rolled in to that payment. If you're facilitating a different kind of system, that may not work. So that's just something to put, effort into in your brainstorming. I hope I didn't go too fast, but I will see where we're at with questions.
And Erin, before we jump into questions, we're able to make that Excel template available to anybody who would like to use it, correct? In terms of having that so that it calculates the Produce Perks discount for them, right?
Absolutely, yes. And it would be a simpler version of what I showed you, because a lot of what goes into that is things that are kind of specific to Local Line and our need to prep those orders for vendors to prep for customers.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Erin. So we did have some questions come in, and I think one of them has been answered. Someone asked, are you just manually entering in someone's SNAP card number and PIN to complete the transaction? So yes, that is happening on site. And it's a good tip to have someone just hold it up to the window and read through the window. If you can do that, eliminates a point of contact. So good idea there. Someone asked Erin specifically, have you had a problem with SNAP transactions being ordered and not picked up?
No, that's a really interesting question, because we actually have not had any orders not picked up, but the vast majority of the customers are prepaying, so they're incentivized. But again, I would largely trace that back to our customers I mean, this is complex they got to really want to order to, to pre-fill out the form and then all of the rigmarole. And so we've mostly been serving pre-existing SNAP customers. So I think that at least that's one reason why it hasn't been an issue.
All right, so I see Roddy kind of repeated that question. Are you, for pre-orders, are you manually entering? I think you can't technically accept that payment or enter any payment until it's on site and delivered, right? So there's not an option to do it as a pre-order. It has to be when the customer is picking up.
Correct, yeah. The one thing that I did recognize early on, is sort of related to those last two questions, is one thing that I couldn't get around is verifying the customer's balance. So if they order $40 worth of product that will be transacted from their card, there's no way I can pre-confirm that they have $40. Because food access is so critical to Countryside's mission, and because we do have, a little bit of resources to cover that, if that were to be a case, we just kind of backburnered it to say that if this becomes a problem, then we will respond accordingly.
Great. So I think the next two questions could be answered by any of the market managers who've spoken, so feel free to unmute yourself. Someone asked about drinks. Do you allow drinks at your market? Can they be sold and consumed on premises? And maybe, I think that came up, Amanda, when you were talking. So do you want to address that, please?
Absolutely. So since we are still like the traditional walk-up market, where people are coming out of their cars and physically on site, we are selling, we do have vendors, both indoor and outdoor, who may have drinks for sale. We actually have a couple of coffee places in our indoor market, and they're still allowed to sell because of, the ruling of as long as it's takeaway. But one of the things that we're highly encouraging for our vendors is to have, whether they're indoors or outdoors, to feel comfortable having signage that says, please don't lay personal items on the table. So that helps with containing the possible contamination or spreading of germs, because people kind of have to keep a hold of the items that they're touching and not using vendor countertops and vendor tables as a place to just lay their items on. That is not necessarily a mandatory rule that we are putting at Findlay Market, but we are encouraging our vendors to have the autonomy and comfort making that known to their customers who may be walking up to their table.
Thank you. I think there's a secondary concern about what is SNAP eligible that I would just mention, that prepared food to be consumed on site is usually not SNAP eligible. Is that correct? So this would be a little bit of a gray area perhaps with some folks, but it's definitely, as far as food safety and kind of the contamination and pandemic risk, that's what Amanda described as how to safely go about serving drinks. Or selling drinks, I guess. How do they collect coins? In a bucket too? So this is for the folks who are using tokens from your vendors. Are you having the vendors directly deposit those in a bucket?
I can explain what we do. All the vendors have their own bag for tokens and a sheet that they fill out. And so they take all their tokens, put them in the bag, fill out the sheet, and then bring it to the market table. We put it all in a big bag, leave it sit for 6 days, and then I count it at home. So each of the vendors has their own bag so that we can sort it out later. Things are crazy at the market, so we just need to get it all home and then deal with it.
Okay. And Amanda, it looked like you had a dirty token bucket. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And so when our education associate, Tori, is interacting with the vendor who's bringing the tokens to her, she just has them directly put it into the used. We thought the language used was a little bit better than dirty.
Yes. Good job.
Just in case customers saw it. But anyway, they put it directly in there. And then we do have a sheet, reimbursement sheet, but it's a carbon copy. So they get the bottom copy that Tori wasn't writing on. So they get kind of the less touched copy, while us in the office will take a copy for ourselves to do the reimbursements appropriately.
Okay.
I'll also jump in just super quickly about that. FM Tracks does have a function to generate receipts. So if you're able to have Wi-Fi at the market and enter your reimbursements, you can generate a receipt to be emailed to the vendor on site. So that's another possibility to go paper-free if ever that could be a solution for anyone.
Great. Okay, at this point, we are going to move into breakout rooms. So you have the chance to connect with each other and maybe troubleshoot some of the issues that you're facing at your market or in your situation. We are going to assign these groups randomly. So there will be the chance that you're with another market manager or with someone who's generally interested. We're going to be in the breakout rooms. We had planned 15 minutes. I think we're going to shorten that to around 10. And what we want you to do is please unmute yourself, introduce yourself briefly, and share one success or challenge. Discuss within your group, and then if you have an emerging question or idea that your group can't solve, we'll bring it back to the large group for a final Q&A. I'm going to type those instructions into the chat box now while Anna breaks us out into the groups so that you'll have the opportunity to look those up in the chat box and remember what you're supposed to be doing. So we will see you back here in about 10 minutes. All right, I think people are trickling back in, so I want to keep us rolling here. I appreciated the discussion in my group and hope that you had a good discussion in yours as well. I will share one question that was raised in our group, and then we'll go around and anyone else can unmute themselves and bring back any last questions. The one that we couldn't answer, and among the 5 of us, was how are markets handling receipts to SNAP customers? Is there a market manager on the call who'd like to share?
I'm texting them. Sorry, this is Erin. I'm texting them, but that is because I use Novadia and that's an option. The older school terminals, I'm sure that's not an option.
All right, and I see Jamie in the chat box said she always texted them as well.
Yeah, we just emailed them, which has always been our case at Findlay Market.
And I can add our process. We just hand the paper receipts back to customers like we have been before, which I see as a relatively safe point of contact. If we have receipt paper that's been in this terminal for a while, that seems like it's not a source of contamination. We're handing it back to customer with gloved hands. I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, and that is something we can use grocery stores as a model. I've been given receipts on paper there, so that's a possibility still. Sarah shared in the chat box that they have a grant for equipment and received a letter stating we were exempt from providing a printed receipt. So that that may be an option. Sounds like many markets are facing that. Great. Open it up for any more questions that were raised in small groups. Karen asks Andrew, how many cars are coming through your market?
For the first 6 weeks when we had fewer vendors, I think we averaged out to about 180 cars a week. And then last week with the larger number of vendors, we had more like 250 cars.
Great. Are there any more aha moments or challenges that people want to share? All right, well, let's move on to the next slide. We do have a few things before we wrap up today. We would love to continue to share resources. The Ohio Farmers Market Network has weekly COVID-19 roundtables that you can connect with. They have a Facebook presence, which is a pretty easy way to get reminders of those, or a website. Both of those will pop in the chat box here. If you are not already connected with Produce Perks Midwest, Allison Farrell is who coordinates the program to deliver incentives at markets. So you could email Allison at produceperks.org. And then we would really appreciate if you would complete a quick survey to share your experience with this webinar and the needs going forward so that we can continue to be a resource to you. If anyone else, well, I think we'll pop the survey link into the chat box, and you are also welcome to share your any other resources that you want to in the chat, because again, that will be saved along with this recording. Everyone can expect an email from Produce Perks in the next week that shares this recording and also the resources, the main resources that we mentioned, so that those will be available for you. And again, stay in contact so that moving forward, we can continue to the best of our ability to deliver this important program to SNAP customers. So really appreciate you being here. Thanks also to our presenters, Erin Molnar, Amanda Lucas, Andrew Rome, and Anna Bird at Produce Perks. Have a great rest of your day. Appreciate everything you all are doing for the local food system.
Yeah, Rachel, have you stopped the recording? Yeah, and then Jamie, if you want to touch base at all